Shalom. Welcome to the Messianic Hour with Rabbi Scott Sekulow. The Messianic Hour is a program designed to give you insight into the Jewish roots of your faith. Rabbi Scott is also here to answer your questions and help you gain a deeper understanding of Bible prophecy. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Scott Sekulow.
Shalom and welcome to a special edition of the Messianic Hour. I'm your host, Rabbi Scott. I'm here with my wife, Judy. This show is dedicated to reaching the lost and educating the found. And we're spending this time right now. We've been talking the last couple of weeks with the situation, the crisis going on with Israel and Hamas, and really how the news media has really been misrepresenting. I can't say the word. Thank you.
Representing.
Thank you. That word isn't so easy. The information coming out, you're hearing of Israel hitting, UN hospitals and schools. What you're not getting the full information is the fact that Hamas is using these areas to shoot rockets from. And if the UN is so concerned about getting a peace treaty going on and a ceasefire, why are they doing this in Syria where hundreds of thousands have been killed in this battle going on? And why doesn't the UN tell Hamas not to put these weapons there? That's an interesting, that's what they need to do. They need to get in and make sure this isn't taking place. I want you to hear a statement from Yosef. He is his father was high up in Hamas. He is now a believer in Messiah. But listen to what his son has to say about the situation.
Can you coexist with someone whose mission is your destruction?
Hamas is not seeking coexistence and compromise. Hamas is seeking conquest and taking over. And by the way, Israel, the destruction of the state of Israel is not Hamas' final destination. Hamas' final destination is building the Islamic Khilafah, which means an Islamic state on the rubble of every other civilization. These are the ultimate goals of the movement.
And you've heard this now from someone who is inside the organization. Their goal is not to coincide in peace. Their role is world domination. That's what's going on right now. We're seeing this take place in different cities around the world. Islam is trying to resurge itself as the dominant religion. The problem is, unlike Judaism, Christianity, and other religions, they allow other people to have other faiths. This one is convert or die. This is a very serious situation. We need to understand what's going on. We need to understand that why Israel is having to sit there and say, we're not going to sit here and let this go on for more and more years, because they're now using these tunnels that they're finding even more every day to infiltrate into Israel. The goal of Hamas is not to live in peace. The goal of Hamas is total destruction. We're going to have a very special guest, Rabbi Eric Tokajer. He is the president and editor of the Messianic Times. He's going to give us some more insight about what's going on. You're not going to want to miss this. Stay tuned. We're going to be back in just a minute, but I want to encourage you, go to our website, rabbiscott.com, sign up for our newsletter so you can be informed about what's going on and really get the truth about what's going on in the land and how Israel is doing its utmost to try to limit the number of casualties of civilians, but how Hamas is using them as human shields. We'll be back right after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Messianic Hour. I'm your host, Rabbi Scott. This show is dedicated to reaching the lost and educating the found. And that is one thing that's so important. We have to understand what's going on in Israel and the situation. You're hearing of large numbers of Palestinian civilians being killed during this conflict. A very limited number of Israeli civilians, not because Hamas hasn't tried. It's because the Iron Dome has been protecting them. But unlike Israel that uses weapons, missiles to protect their civilians, Hamas uses civilians to protect their weapons. And I want you to listen to this soundbite from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
As far as the civilian casualties, I have to tell you, each one of them is a tragedy. We don't want a single civilian tragedy. We're not targeting a single civilian. And every time you see these pictures, they're heartbreaking. But why is it happening? It's happening because Hamas is firing 25,000 rockets on our cities. They're attacking us with terror tunnels dug into our territory. They're attacking us by land, sea, and air. And obviously, we have to respond.
And that's what Israel's doing. They're trying to protect their civilians from these attacks, these tunnels that are being used to infiltrate into Israel. I'm looking on Jerusalem Post right now. 3 IDF soldiers were killed in a booby-trap tunnel shaft in Gaza. So you're seeing they're using this to kill civilians, also to kill the military. With us on the show today, we have a very special guest, Rabbi Eric Tokajer. We've had Rabbi Tokajer on before. He is the editor and president of the Messianic Times. It's a great newspaper. I want to encourage you to, if you have not signed up to receive it yet, you need to do that. And Eric will give you that information. Eric, it's great to have you on the show today.
It's great to be on the program, Scott.
Eric, before we start, go ahead and give the website out so that people have that information if they want to get the newspaper.
It's MessianicTimes.com.
And so if you want to get it, they have a online subscription. It's a great resource, MessianicTimes.com. Go check that out. Eric, you're getting a lot of information of what's been going on here. You just heard what Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying. What are some of the things that you're hearing from your end, and what kind of response have you been getting from the newspaper?
Okay, first of all, we have to understand that the numbers that we hear of the civilian casualties are all provided to us by Hamas. So they've checked and been trying to verify these, and the real numbers of those that have been killed or injured is much lower than the numbers that we're getting. Beyond that, Al Jazeera, which is not a pro-Israel newspaper, cites that 70% or greater of these people that have been injured or killed are males between the ages of 18 and 45, which are the ages of fighters. And when you consider that only 20% of the population in Gaza is between the ages of 18 and 45, the numbers just don't add up to what we're being told in the news. Also, remember that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's a criminal network. It's not a government as we consider government, and it is not an actual military. So according to Hamas, they can claim all of their casualties as civilian, even though the vast majority, over 70%, are the fighting age between the ages of 15 and 45.
Yeah, you make a great point. Someone on Facebook said, I haven't seen the uniform for a Hamas soldier. What does it look like? And the answer, of course, there is no uniform for that. We're going to play a series of sound bites. I want to play sound bite 13, 14, and 15. Joe, if you can run those now, please.
Can you coexist with someone whose mission is your destruction?
Hamas is not seeking coexistence and compromise. Hamas is seeking conquest and taking over. And by the way, Israel, the destruction of the state of Israel is not Hamas' final destination. Hamas' final destination is building the Islamic Khilafah, which means an Islamic state on the rubble of every other civilization. These are the ultimate goals of the movement.
The world has two choices. They need to help us peacefully to reach the state, or we will expel this occupation from our land.
So unless the world will take the Israelis out of the West Bank and Gaza, you will expel them militarily. That's your objective. You believe you can do that.
I do believe this as I see you now. It is a conviction. Why? Because time and time in the history of nations says that peoples have the upper hand over the occupation. I have a will. I can die because of Israel. I cannot live under the occupation. The occupation is the worst thing that you can ever imagine. So every single Palestinian can die for the next generations to live in peace and freedom.
That was from the Hamas leader, who is showing right there that he wants the destruction of Israel. That's what they're looking for. You know, Eric, you've heard what's going on there. You're seeing this, with the paper. What kind of response are you getting? What are you hearing with the idea of a possible ceasefire?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, if you follow the news, you'll find that very same Hamas leader you were just listening to, announced that Hamas was very willing to live in peace and have a ceasefire with the Jews after the occupation is over. And you have to remember, that sounds really pretty and flowery, but when they mean after the occupation, it doesn't mean Samaria and Judea and Gaza. They're talking about the entirety of Israel, and that if Israel will be taken over by Hamas, by Hezbollah, by Islamic Jihad, then they don't have a problem with the Jews serving in dhimmi or in servitude to them in that land, but not as a nation Israel under this caliphate, under this Islamic rulership. And the other thing people have to realize, and we really need to share this word, if you look around the world, it isn't just Israel, although we're seeing Israel on the news and we see what's going on with Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Israel, and also the rockets that have been fired from Hezbollah in the north. But we're seeing this striving for this caliphate in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Egypt, and in Libya. We just closed our U.S. embassy in Libya this week in Tripoli because of Islamic uprising. This is going on around the world. In Paris, in Germany yesterday, there was a firebombing attempt of a synagogue. In Canada, we're seeing uprisings. In the U.S., 10,000 people marched in Chicago last week as supporters of Hamas.
Wow. So why do you think Hamas is getting this strong support when, they're building these tunnels, they're sending these rockets in, they're killing innocent civilians, murdering 3 teenagers, in cold blood? What's the answer?
Two reasons. One is, unfortunately, the majority of the world are no longer Bible believers. So a biblical basis for the nation Israel isn't in the minds of the majority of the world. Secondary, Hamas has, through the United Nations and through the liberal media, a much better PR distribution than Israel does. And so they're constantly showing pictures of children that have been killed and things, which we're finding out. And even the BBC produced a really excellent piece just recently on how many of these pictures that Hamas is presenting as Gaza catastrophes are actually pictures of from Syria and from Lebanon and other places that they're calling as if they happen in Gaza, but they're actually from other places where Muslims are killing Muslims, but they're presenting it that way. Just this week, in the Arab news, there was a report of 50 Arabs that were killed by Hamas for being turncoats. But in the English news, they presented it that these were 50 people were killed by Israelis and not by Arabs. So the news media are willing helpers of Hamas presenting this false picture, and we're just now starting to see a turn on that. CNN did some excellent reports yesterday, which shocked me. Wolf Blitzer brought out the fact that the tunnels were built by cement that Israel provided to Hamas in Gaza to build schools and hospitals, and instead they were used to build these tunnels. Do you realize the head of Hamas has enough money in the bank? By the way, he doesn't live in Gaza.
Right.
He's in Qatar. But he has enough money in the bank that if he wanted to, he could give $20,000 in cash to every person living in Gaza and still have over $200 million in his bank account. The reason he has that much money from being broke a few years ago is that all of this money that's coming from other nations to support these refugees, these poor people in Gaza, have been taken by these corrupt leaders. There are over 1,200 multi-millionaires in the leadership of Hamas right now.
That's amazing. We're going to come back right after the break. We're actually going to hear some of the quotes from CNN right after this break. You're listening to the Messianic Hour. I want to encourage you, go to our website, rabbiscott.com. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Jerusalem, if I forget you, fire not gonna
Welcome back to the Messianic Hour. I'm your host, Rabbi Scott. This show is dedicated to reaching the lost and educating the found. I want to encourage you, go to our website. If you don't get our newsletter already, you need to sign up for it at rabbiscott.com. While you're there, you can support our ministry. We are a listener-supported show. You can also bless Israel, as many of these rockets that are hitting in the forest and burning down the trees, and you can bless Israel by planting a tree in Israel. For a donation of $25, you can plant a tree there. We plant on your behalf. You get a beautiful certificate, and it's a great way to bless Israel and show your support for the land. We have online with us today Rabbi Eric Tokajer. He is the senior rabbi down in Pensacola, Florida. He's also the editor of the Messianic Times. You can go to messianictimes.com. And you need to sign up for this newspaper. It is great. They have a great online resource, and you can get this kind of news, the news you're not getting from CNN and Fox and others. But this is really something that you really need to be informed with. But speaking about CNN, I want you to hear these couple sound bites, because CNN is even starting to take the stance and supporting Israel with some of their comments. Take a listen right now.
The government accepted a few ceasefires. Hamas did not. Let's say they accepted other ceasefire right now. Would that be appropriate?
I think it will be a mistake. You do not negotiate with the Hamas. You do not beg with the Hamas. You make them beg. And I think what Secretary Kerry did in the last week was a mistake. He put Israel and the Hamas in the same level. It's like I will tell you that the U.S. and Al-Qaeda are in the same level.
Hamas isn't even recognized by the United States. It's considered a terrorist organization. The U.S. doesn't even talk to Hamas. Why would you say that Kerry would put Hamas in the same category as Israel?
Secretary Kerry's proposal was an insult for us.
Why was it an insult?
Because when you say a ceasefire between the Hamas and Israel, and you don't address the main issue of the missiles, or of the tunnels, today he spoke differently, and I think he spoke better. But last week, when he said, cease the fire, let's talk, we cannot talk with a terrorist organization.
And that's really the key. Israel has gone through and offered several ceasefires, and Hamas has rejected them. People forget that. Hamas is coming and saying no. They reject them outright. And only when Israel comes in and really is attacking, then they'll say, okay, now we want a ceasefire. Now we want a ceasefire. And then when they sit and talk, no, we don't want it. And that's what's been going on with the situation. Rabbi Eric, you're seeing this going on. What's your response to what you're hearing?
Well, one of the things I want to clarify, Rabbi Scott, is that it wasn't just that Israel presented this ceasefire plan and Hamas rejected it. 5 times Hamas accepted temporary ceasefires, and all 5 times they violated it by firing rockets into Israel while Israel was observing the ceasefire. So there were other times that ceasefires were presented, but 5 times they were accepted by Hamas, and then Hamas violated the terms of the ceasefire almost immediately by firing rockets into Israel. Also talking about Kerry's ceasefire, which Israel sees as a horrible, horrible thing and a really bad show of friendship and support from the United States, because Kerry's ceasefire agreed to every term that Hamas presented, but did not bring into any of the terms that Israel presented. And no wonder Israel unanimously opposed that ceasefire. They couldn't accept it. And not only that, the damage was done not just in Israel, but because they did that with Hamas, it deflated the value of Abbas, the
Right.
PA leader, of having any kind of authority or any kind of leadership in this, because they raised Hamas to a level they didn't deserve to be, which lowered Abbas in the eyes of the Palestinian people. And it was a slap in the face to Saudi Arabia, to Egypt, and to Jordan, all who are trying to work on these ceasefire arrangements with Israel, supporting Israel in the destruction of Hamas's military.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, and people also have to realize the times that Israel has rejected these supposed ceasefires, so has Egypt, because of what the conditions that Hamas has put on Israel and Egypt. People, they only hear about that every once in a while. Egypt has also rejected these ideas because Hamas wants them to open up their borders as well.
Yeah, actually, Israel is being bombed and rocketed in order to get Egypt to open up their borders. One of the demands on Israel is that Egypt would open its borders, as if Israel has the control over Egypt. And people don't realize that Egypt has killed more Hamas members and destroyed more tunnels than Israel has. And at this point in time, by the demonstration of the leadership of the country, Egypt is supporting Israel in more extensive ways than even the United States is.
That's amazing. Eric, before the show, you and I talked about a quote that Nancy Pelosi said. We actually have that soundbite, but I want you to go ahead and set it up. Let us know what we're about to hear from the speaker.
Okay, Nancy Pelosi is the former Speaker of the House, one of the heads of the Democratic Party, and she was asked a question about Hamas, and her reply was that Hamas was a humanitarian aid organization and not a terrorist organization. And the reason she knew that is because her friends in Qatar and Turkey said so.
Let us hear that spot right now. Go ahead and roll it, Joe.
We have to confer with the Qataris, who have told me over and over again that Hamas is a humanitarian organization. Maybe they could use their influence to
the U.S. thinks they're a terrorist organization, though, correct to you?
Mm-hmm.
So you heard the last thing. The U.S. Considers Hamas a terrorist organization. Do you? And her response was, hum. That was an interesting response.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people believe that Hamas is this wonderful humanitarian organization. When you realize what's actually going on, the UN, the EU, and America and other countries are sending vast amounts of money into Gaza. It's going in the pockets of Hamas leadership. And then Israel is sending in food and clothing and building hospitals and building schools and building roads and providing electricity and all of those things for Gaza. You know, Rabbi Scott, it's amazing, even during this war that's going on between Hamas and Israel, and it's important for people to realize the Gaza Strip is part of Israel.
That's right.
This is a battle that's going on within the borders of a country. It's not a separate country, as people seem to think. Gaza is still part of Israel, but as this is going on, almost 1,000 trucks of humanitarian aid have been brought in by Israelis to Gaza, as well as Israel set up a hospital on the border to treat the Arab injured that come as a result of the attacks.
You know, it's amazing. I want to get back to her comment for a second because, you know, that you're hearing a lot about Turkey and Qatar and how they were actually a part of this peace process that neither Israel, Palestinians, or Hamas were invited to, yet Turkey and Qatar are very pro-Hamas and actually support them financially.
Erdogan from Turkey, the Prime Minister of Turkey, came out last week and said that Israel was doing genocide on Palestinians and that they're worse than the Nazis. That's the kind of people that are standing at the table presenting this ceasefire to Israel. And Qatar is the one that provided $400 million to Hamas that paid for much of the missiles and the tunnels that have been built.
You know, we got about a minute left on the show. What's your take on what John Kerry, our secretary, is doing? Where does it need to go from here? We got about a minute left.
Well, I think the best thing he could do is stay away as far as Israel's concerned. Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Abbas have been working to bring about a ceasefire that will demilitarize the Gaza from Hamas, and that's the only way that this is going to slow down and be stopped.
And that's key to remember. That's what Israel's been looking for. They're trying to get rid of these tunnels. So is Egypt. These tunnels go into Egypt too. They built these massive tunnels, used primarily the concrete that was supposed to go to rebuild the buildings from the situation from 2012 has been going into building these elaborate tunnels to make attacks into Israel. It's just been amazing to see what's going on, and we need to keep informed of what's happening. I want to encourage you, go to RabbiScott.com, sign up for our newsletter, but also go to MessianicTimes.com and sign up for there so you can get this kind of information. You need to stay informed so you can tell your friends the truth about what's going on in the situation. Until next week, this is Rabbi Scott telling you to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.